Dear African Muslims, the African ancestors are upset with you. They want to know why you are practicing a stolen, diluted regurgitation of their tradition, corrupted by people who exploit you. Why not practice the original Cushitic Kemetic spiritual system and not their bastardized forgery? Your refusal to utilize the power of your ancestors is why you remain the Arabs' prostitutes.
Good evening, brothers and sisters. Today, what we're going to do, what I'll be doing in the Quranic study today, is a verse from the Quran, chapter 14, verse 4. I want to go through the verse to give some clarity on the meaning of the verse and how it will answer many questions today. When we read this particular verse and it says, Wa ma arsalna min rasulin illa bal bil sani wahdihi li yubayyani lahum, and not have we sent of any messenger except with the language of his people for clarity to them for them, so that they can understand the message clearly. So when we look at this particular verse, it speaks of all the prophets, but here we're going to be dealing with the prophet Muhammad. But it speaks to all the prophets or messengers, prophet messengers and messengers, who went amongst them people with a message from God. He sent the message with the messenger in the language of those people, and the prophet was of those people. And he spoke clearly in their language. Now, the point to be made is the language of the Quran is not the language that the Euro-Asian or European Asians that's in Arabia and we're calling Arabs today. It's not the language they speak that's in the Quran. It's not that language. It's a whole different language. And another point to be made is that Arabia has not always been called Arabia. We know from a lot of the rabbinical writings or historical writings, we see that Arabia had, the place we call it Arabia, had many different names. For instance, the Bible calls it the land of Paran or the land of Kedar. It was called Petra. It was even called Yemen, or Yemen Felix, or Arabia Felix. As I say, it was called many different names, not Arabic or Arab. So the language of the land was called by different names. So is the language. The most known name for the language, as well as the land, was the land of Kedar and the tongue of Kedar. In the rabbinical writings, they referred to the Arabic language as the language of Kedar and his people and country. So, who was Kedar? And how do Kedar fit into this particular ayat? This is what we want to explain. The answer being the Quran was written in the Kedarite tongue. So, in reference to the prophet coming with a message in the language of his people, and the language in the Quran is the language of Kedar, then the Prophet Muhammad would have been coming to the descendants of Kedar. That's what we want to focus on. Who are the descendants of Kedar? So to explain that, we know the word Kedar, Hebrew or Arabic, both languages, means to be black, to be powerful, to be ordained, to have a decree or to have dark skin. We know from our historical writings, Kedar was black. We know that Kedar was the second son of Ishmael. We know that Ishmael was the son of Hagar and Abraham, or Ibrahim in Arabic, as they call it. We know that Hagar was from Kemet. The Bible says she was from Egypt. We know Egypt was Kemet. We know that Abraham was an African as well, from what we call the Chaldea area, or Chad as they call it, however they go about it. The Bible tells us that before Abraham was called Abraham, he was called Abram, or in the Hebrew language, he was called Abraham. The word Abraham means father. When God made this covenant with Abraham, he told him that his name would no longer be Abraham, and Abraham means father. He told him that his name from here on out would be Abraham. We know the word Ham either in Hebrew or Arabic or Aramaic. In each language, Ham is a Hamitic word or Kemetic word that means black. So when you say Abraham, you're saying black father, or if we look at it from the biblical text, father of the blacks, because this is the promise in which God made that covenant with Abraham, in which in Islam we call the Malat of Ibrahim, the covenant God made with Ibrahim. And that covenant to the Muslims, as we say, is the covenant God made with Abraham through Ishmael, and that Ishmael would have 12 sons, and each one would be a prince, as the Bible tells us. So, being that Abraham means black or black father, and he married Hagar, who was a Kemite from Egypt, a black woman, who had Ishmael, a black son, from a black mother, a black father, a black son. We know that the Bible tells us that Hagar took Ishmael into Kemet, or Egypt, Kemet, to get his wife. So, Ishmael, being the son of a black father, black mother, and his mother took him into Kemet to find a black wife. And he had these 12 black sons. The second son, Kedar. The Kedarites, whom the Prophet Muhammad comes from, the lineage of Kedar, comes from that African lineage. We know that it is the Kedarite language in which the Quran was given in. So it would be obvious that when the prophet came, he came to those who spoke that language, would be the descendants of Kedar, those African tribes. We know that in the rabbinical writings, Ishmael's son, Nabiat, whom we understand as the Nabateans, and the Kedarites were those who spoke what we call the Fusha language, what they call Old or Classical Arabic, the original Arabic in which the Quran was given in, the original language or term in which the Quran was given in. So, keeping that in mind, we understand that these people spoke this language from the 4th century BCE all the way up to the 7th century AD, during the time of Prophet Muhammad. It wasn't until the 7th century AD that the Eurasian or European Asiatic people who was mixed came and began invading the area of what we call Iran, or what they're calling Arabia. And we know that it wasn't until a little later on that they began to Europeanize the language and create what we have today, called this modern standard version of Arabic, which they try to teach us the Quran from, which is a misunderstanding of the original language. It has none of the modern standard version. Grammar has none of the Kemetic grammar. So we're not understanding the Kemetic grammar of the Quran. We're understanding the modern standard grammatics of the Quran, which they try and teach in these books. Learn the language of the Quran. And not that the books are not useful to begin a process of learning the actual language of the Quran, but it is not the proper, it does not have all the proper grammatics to it. You'll have to start learning Kemetic grammar for yourself and apply the Kemetic grammar to the Fushi language, or the language of Kedar. So what I would like you to do is take a picture of this, research it. If you have questions that you wish to dial out or debate, you can put it in the comment part of the video, and I'll be glad to dialogue or even debate.